title of my presentation, Pain, Abolishing a Necessary Evil. Evil because we don't like pain. We want to be rid of it. But yet it's necessary in life. And then we've got this complex situation where we're trying to get rid of it. So trying to get rid of something that's necessary is an interesting dynamic. And I'm going to try to walk you through that today and what it's about and where we are specifically for livestock production. So I am the research leader for the Livestock Behavior Research Unit. It is the research branch of the USDA, the Agriculture Research Service. Our mission is to develop scientific measures of animal welfare that allow for objective, which is a key, evaluation of animal agriculture practices. We are the only research unit in the United States from the USDA that is actually targeted and directed to do that. And we also choose to improve existing practices and invent new practices to enhance animal welfare. We have 5 scientists on board, ranging from neuroscientists to ethology to stress physiology to immunology and bacteriology. The interest in farm animal welfare has grown and grown and grown since I've actually graduated from college in '95. Look at the amount of publications just on animal welfare, exponentially increasing. The 2013, you can see the rise. And what's interesting is if you look at what those publications are about, between 95 and 2000, it's really about pain, general animal welfare, how do you do things better, how do you mitigate pain. And if you look at the publications since 2009, 2013, it's a lot of assessment, policy, and legislation. Okay, so what was a basic science of animal welfare has become a public interest, and you see that reflected in the publications that are coming out. So it's not going away, and it's something we need to talk about. So there are mounting regulations, policies, standards, assessments from the industry. So our pointer doesn't work, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Sorry.
So from the industry, we had Smithfield, probably back in '99, I think.
The pointer does work.
So Smithfield back in '99, telling their producers that they have to move their sows out of gestation stalls and into groups. We have the producer groups, beef quality assurance and pork quality assurance programs targeted at specifically looking at increasing animal welfare to meet consumer demands. We also have external groups, American Humane Certified as one, where producers can say, okay, I'm going to raise my animals by this standard, which includes pain mitigation methods, and they can use this label to market their product as a higher income generating product, I guess. And so most recent is Tyson's. I'm sure you all know about it. In January said that their producers should stop using blunt force trauma on pigs, and they should use some type of pain mitigation when they're castrated and tail docking. So that really puts the producer in the middle because they don't have options for pain mitigation. Because there's no analgesics approved, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But you can see how this is just snowballing to meet public demand, public expectations, and the producer is stuck in the middle. ISO has more recently come on board, the last 2 years. ISO is a certification program, you've heard about that already this morning, that sets standards, and they've included animal welfare in their latest standard, and they're trying to write that up now. So what is pain? Let's talk about that for a minute. This is a complex kind of diagram, but we're not going to be that into it. Essentially, you have an injury. There's a specific receptors in your skin and in your body that sense pain. They're activated. They go through, this is your spinal cord, through your spinal cord, and there's A and C fibers. The A fibers are extremely myelinated, which means that basically they have a sheath around them. So that can very quickly relay the information to your brain. And their C fibers are just more general fibers and sense the whole area, and much slower. They're non-myelinated. But the point of this diagram is they go through the spinal cord, up to the brainstem, the thalamus, which is part of your brain actually controls fear, and into your cortex, which is your thought process. And so the point of this diagram is to show you that two individuals can have the same stimulus. So if I stick you with a pen, it's going to hurt. But I can stick two different people, and they won't feel the same pain. And the reason is because it's being modified as it goes up through this system. And so that's the complexity of trying to measure pain and sense pain, is that individuals feel things differently. And so when you try to make the jump from a human, I just stuck two people with a pen, to an animal, and trying to understand how the animal feels pain, it's quite difficult to do, and it depends on a lot of different external factors in the cortex as well as in the thalamus. And this is another complex thing, but the point of this is that when we do have a pain stimulus, tissue damage in this case, you get a quick nerve injury, and there's neuropeptides and neurotransmitters that are activated from that, and secondary substance P, catecholamines, etc., end up causing pain. If it causes damage in the long term, you get inflammation, which activates part of the immune system. So lymphocytes, macrophages, etc., mast cells are expressed in histamines and serotonin to cause pain. So the point of this is me as a scientist and trying to assess pain in an animal, the same as a doctor would in a human, I can go in and measure some of these substances to try to assess how deep the pain is and how significant the pain is. So if pain is such an evil, as I said in my title, why is it here? Well, it has a significant function. Okay? It is an adaptive evolutionary strategy to protect the body. Okay, so if you burn yourself, you know the next time not to get close to the stove, right? So it acts as an early warning system to preserve the animal's body. It allows the animal to learn what not to do. So we use that a lot in training situations. Pain as a punishment essentially stops the behavior. And the more intense in general, the more intense the pain, the greater the threat. Okay? So it's a very useful learning tool, and it helps us to survive and thrive. There's also, though, non-adaptive pain, and that's like chronic pain. It's a situation where the pain persists, although the trauma has healed itself. And there's another thing that I'm going to talk about more in depth is neuromas. And that's a chronic pain that persists, but it's not adaptive. It exists in your body, and it's not helping the animal to survive at all. And it's something, particularly to agriculture, we need to try to manage and understand. There are two diseases, I will call them diseases, in humans, CIPA and HSAN, which is congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, which means they don't sweat. People, and this is for humans, they don't sweat. And also hereditary sensory and autonomic neuropathy. These people do not feel pain. Zero, none at all. Okay? And so you think, hey, I want that disease, right? You never feel a stick of a needle. You just stick them, no response. And these are babies, right? They're not trained. Cut or burn, nothing. Never feel hunger. And so the point of that is that when I say pain, you probably think of being cut. Pain is on a continuum from discomfort to excruciating. And so you in this audience sitting here feel pain in the sense that you're in a chair and you change your position. Okay? That's just discomfort. But if you think about people in the hospital laying in a bed, they have to change position or they get bed sores, right? So your body is using that pain to help you cope and so that you don't deteriorate or get injured. So hunger is a sort of pain, but it starts out as discomfort before it gets too intense. And these people never feel uncomfortable in a chair as you move your body. I think the stats would be you probably change positions 15 times in a 30-minute presentation. Okay, so you don't realize it, but you're doing it constantly. So it sounds like a great thing, right? Never feel pain. Unfortunately, pain is necessary. These children will actually, I can't see that well, this is a baby's thumbs, where it has chewed its thumbs because it doesn't feel pain. They have to be protected. They will actually poke out their eyes and scratch at them and terrate them because they don't feel pain. They'll actually just document it where they actually just sit on a furnace and burn, get third-degree burns on their legs or arms because they don't feel it. Most of them die before they're 3 years old. I think there's 17 people like this in the United States right now. Their usual cause of death is heat stroke, dehydration, fever, and blood poisoning, secondary infections. So pain is very important in our lives. We need it. We don't like it. We need it. So we don't want to abolish it, but we want to try to manage it. But as a scientist, my job is to measure things that are objective, right? I can only measure what is objective. But pain is subjective. It is a feeling. Everybody feels it differently. When you go to the doctor, they can't measure it. They ask you, how bad is the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Okay? And it's individualized. So it has both the physiological component, those parameters I was telling you I as a scientist can measure, but it also has a psychological component. So I can have the same stimulus, but depending on my psychological state, fear, happiness, depression, etc., I will feel the pain differently. And that is our challenge, and it's even more important when we're talking about animals, or more difficult when we're talking about animals. And the other thing is animals can't communicate with us about their pain. They can't tell us on a scale of 1 to 10, what is it? So we as scientists have to try to figure out how to assess how bad that pain is. It can be overridden by feelings of fear, fighting, motivation. And it's also affected by genetics, age, production status, environments, lesions. And the age thing is very interesting. I'll talk about that when we talk about tail docking in cattle. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through, and I use the chicken as an example because we kind of relate to mammals. Chicken's a little further removed, but so can the chicken feel pain? Can the cow feel pain? So how do you go about figuring that out? One thing is, I told you we have receptors for pain. So you start looking for receptors in animals. And so these are pain receptors. This is the beak, actually, of a chicken right here. And these are pain receptors. This is a close-up of the pain receptors. So we can look at, okay, we know in humans we have 3 different types of pain receptors, mechanical, thermal, and chemical. Do chickens have that? And they do. It's called something different, herpes and granularies, corpuscles, and free nerve endings. So that's one part of the evidence to say, okay, indeed a chicken can feel pain. We also look at the behavioral and physiological parameters. And if we look at the behavioral, we know that behavioral and physiological changes in injuries between chickens and mammals are similar. We can also use pharmacological studies. So the argument of animals can't feel pain or don't feel it the same way as we do is negated by the fact that we use animals to study analgesics. To get analgesics approved, for you to use ibuprofen, you use some type of opioid drug to relieve your pain. That was already tested on an animal and proved to work. Okay? And so if it alleviated pain in animals before it actually got to the market, that you could use it. So you can use these studies and show that both chickens and humans have similar pain responses. So in conclusion, from those types of data, and this is an example for chickens, we know chickens feel pain and in a similar manner to humans. And this is true for cattle, pigs, etc. I'm just using a species more diverse than we are, or different than we are. So what is the definition of pain? If you look at it, it's defined in animals and humans. You see it's quite similar. It's an aversive sensory and emotional experience from the animal in response to damage or a threat. That's the key as well. It's a threat to its integrity. The same thing in humans. Unpleasant sensory emotional experience associated with actual and potential tissue damage. So it's an animal protecting itself and responding so that it can actually move on and live. So although it's subjective, we can't measure it directly, we can assess it indirectly. We can look at physical parameters, so looking at body injuries and scores, growth rates. We know if it's severely injured, it's going to slow down its growth. We can look at the physiological parameters I talked about, so neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and the behavior, general behavior of the animal. There's a whole field of study about sickness behavior, guarding behavior, so you know if you're hurt and someone goes up to touch you or something, you like automatically protect yourself and guard yourself. Animals do the same thing. So a special case that's important for animal agriculture is this idea that about neuromas. So just briefly, a neuroma, this is a nerve cell, okay? So just say the tip of my finger, I've got a nerve cell, this is the base of the cell, goes out, and if I stick with the pen, I feel pain. What happens if I cut my finger, I can cut that nerve, right here. After a while, it regrows, and so it still gets back to the target, and everything's normal again. When it goes wrong, if you will, when we cut something off, so this is people that have been amputees, have a leg or hand, foot amputated, that target's no longer there. So the tip of the finger is no longer there. And so the nerve has two choices or decisions, if you will. It can go out here and stop and just degenerate, or it can go out here and form a neuroma. And so it's a bundle of nerves. It's trying to get to the end, and it can't get to the end, and so it just kind of gets a bundle of nerves. And if you've heard of phantom limb pain, that's an amputee whose foot hurts, but they don't have a foot, right? And so it's chronic pain, non-stimulated, and the special emphasis for us in agriculture is we cut things off of animals. So we tail dock, we beak trim, and the question is, are we forming neuromas, and are those animals having chronic pain from those neuromas? So we can look at that histologically, meaning in the case of beak trimming, we kill the chickens and section it and look at it under the microscope and see, actually look, are there neuromas there? And so I already said there's a tangled mass of nerves. Unmyelinated means it's going to spread. That pain sensation is going to be very sensitive and be picked up quite easily. And the case that we're really concerned about is ectopic firing. So that means an amputee, in a human situation, amputee, all of a sudden their foot hurts. Nothing stimulated that. It just hurts with no stimulus. Okay? So is that occurring in animals is a question. The other thing is, even if that's not occurring, those neuromas are actually quite sensitive to heat and cold and stimulus of touching, and they can be quite painful. So it has an increased pain sensitivity. So are there painful situations in animal agriculture? Sure there are. I've categorized them in two situations: controllable, beak trimming, castration, tail docking, and branding. I actually did my master's research at Texas A&M on branding, looking at hot and cold branding to see which one was more painful than the other. We know that when we tail dock lambs, it's painful and how they react. But there's also these uncontrollable situations that we as an industry we need to be able to have a action plan for, because it usually ends up in the public sector, and how we respond to that's quite important. Situations where we have an accident and the truck turns over on the highway, a very public way. This is a dead cow here. This is where a tornado's hit a poultry barn. And how do you respond to that? How do you manage animal welfare and manage pain control effectively? And I put birth in here. That's actually an interesting topic, whether that's, people debate whether that's painful or not, but another talk altogether. So we know analgesics will alleviate pain. That's by definition what they do. So why don't we just use analgesics? If you look at veterinary medicine, vets know quite clearly if an animal's on an analgesic, you do surgery on it, it improves quicker, it comes back to normal better, faster, less disease, etc. So why don't we just use it? And this is just one example from Hans Kossi, Iowa State, looking at giving meloxicam before castration. And so he looked at the incidence of bovine respiratory disease, and if you see these top bars here, he found and this is one, so this is control and castrated right here. So no meloxicam, but castrated. You see the pull rate was much higher if they did not have analgesic, and the treatment rate was much higher for BRD. So we know giving analgesics is beneficial, and so you get out to the public and it's like, well, just do it then. Why don't you do it? That doesn't make sense. Well, there's a lot of why don't we do it. It's difficult. Number one, you have to have an analgesic that's readily available and registered for use, which they're not. Okay, there's only one analgesic, and it's only an anti-inflammatory that's registered for use in the United States and cattle. So we don't have the ability to give analgesics legally. And even if you did, then you need to get by the other hurdles. Is it easy to administer? A lot of times we're working with thousands of animals. How do you administer that to thousands of animals? It needs to be quick, but also has to be long-acting. So if I castrate a litter of pigs, first, if I'm going to go and get analgesic, it's going to take 30 minutes to work. So there's a practicality in that. And so that may be okay when I castrate them, but then the reality is the pain's going to be there tomorrow, right? And so if it's not quick and long-acting, it's not very feasible for us. So it's a really difficult thing to do. It has to have a short withdrawal period. The animals are going to slaughter, possibly, going to human consumption. What drugs have that short withdrawal period that we can use? And bottom line, it has to show return on investment. And that's obviously difficult to do, or impossible in this day and age. So I'm going to go into some situations in animal agriculture in which pain is involved, and what our choices are, if you will, and how we manage it and assess it. One of our problems with poultry is cannibalism. So the hens will peck each other and actually kill each other. This is a hen that's been pecked quite clearly. All of her feathers, a lot of it's around vent pecking. They will do so much damage as to kill the bird, bleed out, and eat them. And this is really a concern when we go into a big housing situation where they're all together as well. So our solution then is to basically beak trim. This is a chick, I don't know how well you can see that, but this is a chick that's been beak trimmed, and it's a hot blade cauterizing system. So it's a hot blade that cuts down and cauterizes at the same time so they don't bleed. And this is an older hen and what she looks like. And it's very effective in decreasing cannibalism. And this is just a table looking at predicted levels of behavioral expression. So we say, okay, in today's situation, we want to move animals out of strict confinement and give them bigger space. That's great when we look at something like stereotyped behaviors. So stereotyped behavior is a bad behavior, if you will. Expression is quite high in a conventional cage. The predicted levels in a non-cage or outdoor system, this is furnished cage, sorry, I should set that up for you in these columns, is less. So that would say those systems are better based on that measure. However, what you see, if we look at cannibalism, this is smothering, is the same trend. Cannibalism is relatively low in a conventional cage, and the predicted level gets much higher when you get in those big situations, and it's because it's socially facilitated, it can spread throughout the system. And so how do we manage that? So beak trimming is the way to manage that. But we know it causes pain. Okay, so these are chicks that are hot. Can you see that very well? It looks too dark to me. But anyway, these are chicks that are hot heat blade trimmed, so the traditional way. And you can see this, it's a standardized or standard response. These chicks are hunched over. Perfect, thank you, Shay. Hunched over, their eyes are squinted. In pain, behavioral response to pain from the situation. These are normal chicks that they didn't trim. They're walking around, eyes open, pecking at food. And these, it's a new technology called infrared laser trimming. So a laser, basically, it's like a laser surgery if you had like a cancer or something. Hits the beak and burns it. And these are chicks that have been laser trimmed. And so we looked at trying to compare this. So this is a hot blade trim, and this is a laser trim. And you can see that end right there is discolored a little bit. That one had a laser applied to it. So we wanted to know, is one less painful than the other? And so this is work from Heng-Wei Chen, is my neuroscientist. So if they have neuromas, they're going to be very sensitive, as I said, to heat or cold or to touch. So he developed a test where he deprived them of water for 12 hours, and then he gave them water, but he made it warm, not hot, just warm. And so if they had neuroma in there, they would sense the pain quite readily and pull back away from it. And if the purple bars is in a drinking event, and the pink is a approach event. And so he actually had laser to show when the chick got close to the water actually drank. And so these are all drinking events. I don't know if you can see that, but they're all purple. Drink, drink, drink. If they were hot blade trim, this is actually pink, pink. There's a purple here, and a purple there, and a purple there. They'd approach, but not drink. And then finally they drank. So you can see the huge difference between these two behavioral responses. And this is infrared laser, and this is, I don't think you can see it, purple, purple. These are purple right here, and then the approach. So much better than this, but still not the same as that. So as a scientist, what that tells me is that these animals are feeling pain because they're not drinking. These animals are feeling less pain because they're drinking more. And this is 5 weeks after they were beak trimmed. So showing it's a chronic situation that's evident in these birds. The other situation is yes?
Just a quick question on that.
Yep.
Was there a difference in performance between those groups?
No, there's not. And that's the thing. So her question was, is there a difference between performance of the hens? A lot of situations, so there's people say, well, if they're laying eggs, then they're okay, right? But we've actually documented where, and actually my next slide will show this the same thing, where animals can have broken bones and still lay an egg because we've selected for productivity so strong. And so my argument on the other side of that is then if productivity is impaired, then you really know you've got a significant problem because all of our genetics and selection has selected for animals that will produce no matter what, because otherwise we're going to kill them. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions? So this is a situation. So the argument, move hens out of cages and put them into barns to give them more space. We've solved the problem, right? Hens are no longer restricted. Well, we tend to cause more problems or other problems when we solve one problem. In this situation, this is an aviary. You can see it. There's a whole bunch of hens through here, free moving and about. But what Christine Nickel found when she went actually and looked at these birds, that 46 to 90% of them had fractures in their keel bone. And so this is their keel bone, which is your sternum right here. And so the tip of it right here, these birds were breaking their bones. And it's by jumping off a perch and trying to land on something. So we create a situation which is probably painful. So she followed that up, actually trying to look, are keel bone fractures painful? The first two bars are hens that do not have keel bone fracture. The last two bars are hens that do. And what she looked at was she had a perch that was 50 centimeters high, 100 centimeters high, or 150 centimeters high. And so the thought is, if the hen's on a perch and she has to jump down, if she's in pain or has had pain impacted before, she's going to be more hesitant to jump off that perch. And that's what you see. So if they don't have a keel bone fracture, this is seconds. Well, 1 or 2 seconds, 3 seconds, they're jumping off the perch. If they do have keel bone fractures, if it's lower, they jump pretty quickly. As it gets higher, they're more hesitant. So they're understanding that the height and the jumping is going to cause me pain if I land. And then she's moved that one step further, and the green bars is hens that she gave an analgesic to, these butorphanol. to relieve their pain. And what you see numerically is a little bit lower. So if they're on a drug, they're more likely to jump sooner than if they're not on the drug. So showing that the hens have keel bone fractures and they are painful to the animal. So that's the next problem we need to solve and free-moving hens. We've also looked at procedures in piglets. We do a lot of processing with piglets. Typically, they have their teeth resected, tail docking, identification, iron, and castration. This is work that was funded by the National Pork Board. And what we wanted to know is, you always have a choice when you do a procedure, either not to do it, number one, or different ways you could do it. And are there alternatives that are less painful than the other? So we looked at this, and we compared teeth clipping with clipping versus grinding. Looking at tails, either cold clip or hot clip. ID, ear notching versus ear tag. Iron, which is an injection versus oral paste. And castration, either cutting the cords or tearing the cords. To try to figure out which one is less painful so we can give recommendations as less painful methods to do things. And what we found was grinding was worse than teeth clipping, hot clip was worse than cold, ear notching worse than ear tag, oral paste worse than injection, sounds weird, doesn't it? And cords torn worse than cords cut. And those are based on behavior and physiology and heart rate. The issue, I'll jump back to the bottom. Well, I'll start at the top. So when we did single one at a time, we could figure out which one was worse. It got more complex when we put them all together. You know, the whole series. And let's do this, the less painful versus the most painful, and see what it does. And really, it seemed the key was how accurate you were and the speed. So the faster you were, the less stressful or painful it was. And I think that's more a fact of our measures that we use. So stress hormones, the longer you take, they're going to go up higher, heart rate, etc. And so it's a tricky situation and not very clear at this point. The other area we've looked at is euthanasia, obviously a critical topic. How do you humanely kill an animal and be painless about it? And so this is research that we did in our lab. And our question was, so CO2 is recommended as a humane euthanasia method. It's highly criticized as being aversive to pigs. If you've seen a pig in CO2, they have a huge reaction to that, which indicates that it's quite painful. So we looked at CO2 versus different mixtures of gases, and this is nitrogen and carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide and oxygen. And so we did two experiments, and one was where we put the animal in this chamber, it just had air, and then this chamber, it had the gas that we were testing. And so the idea is, and these are its buddies, they're not dead, I know they look dead, but they're not. These are its litter mates who are just sleeping under a heat lamp. And so the pig then was drawn to this chamber to get back with his buddies, but there'd be a gas in there. And the idea is, if this gas is aversive, they don't like it, then they'll run back to this side. So I can measure time spent in this and time spent in this chamber to see, from the pig's perspective, which gas is worse. So we did that. Carbon dioxide was extremely aversive. They don't stand in carbon dioxide at all. Nitrous oxide and oxygen, they didn't even notice, basically, until they started to fall down. And this is a chamber here, and this is where the buddies were, litter mates. So we looked at that to see the aversiveness of gases, and then we did a second experiment, and we actually subjected them to the gas. So we gassed them in this chamber, and then this side was filled with CO2 to actually humanely euthanize them. To see, could we do a two-stage process where we basically effectively sedated the piglets and then humanely euthanized them with CO2 after they couldn't feel the pain. And these are the data from that second experiment. And so this is transferred from the treatment gas into the CO2. So they always go into the CO2 as the second stage. And this is how long it took. if they're exposed to CO2 in the first chamber, so slowly filling into the chamber, it only took about 3 seconds. Because what happens is they start to squeal and jump and react. And so that was our key point to move them into the CO2 to go ahead and euthanize them. And so 3 seconds, 6 seconds for the other two gases, combinations. Much longer for the nitrous oxide and oxygen, up to 14 seconds. But what was key on this is why did you move them into the CO2 chamber? And this is the only treatment that actually sedated the pigs. So the pigs would fall over. We'd hit the eye reflex. There's no eye reflex. We'd take a pen and touch their nose and touch their foot. And they weren't having a response to the pain. So we're trying to develop this as a more humane, painless alternative to euthanasia. And we're still working on that right now. I've got a collaborator in Australia who's looking at the gold measure of whether an animal feels pain is EEG, which is brain activity, and the location of the brain activity. So we've euthanized pigs with carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, and this is just an EEG trace. And you can see this is a flat line, so the animal's dead at this point. There's a flat line here. So it's taken about 30 seconds longer, but the key is, when does that animal become unconscious? And when does it lose sensitivity to pain? We've also looked at lameness. Lameness is a big problem in animal agriculture for dairy cows as well as sows. A lot of animals are culled for this reason. And interestingly, even though a lot of sows are culled for different reasons, if you actually look at them, they're lame. And so it is a big problem. One of our theories was that if you look at horses, they're kept in stalls. Those animals have thinner bones, less cartilage, and it's because of inactivity. So we know if the animal's more active, you'll have stronger bones, better cartilage. And so our thought was, okay, maybe the sows are going lame because they're in stalls and not getting exercise. So this is an idea one of my poor graduate students who came up with the idea, and we regretted it later. She exercised sows for 3 days a week or 5 days a week, and so she got them out and moved them around here. And what we thought was we get increased bone density and muscle weight, which we did get increased bone density. It did increase the bone. Increase in osteoblastic activity and decrease in osteoclastic activity, which is bone remodeling, and improve the condition of the joints and hooves compared to just sows that stayed in stalls. Well, that wasn't the case. What we found when we killed those sows was that all of them had osteochondritic lesions. I'm not sure if you can see this. This is a healthy proximal femur, and this is just the tendon going through it, or the ligament going through it. So that's normal cartilage. And if you can see it right here, this bone has been worn down, so it's red underneath of here. So it'd be like the joint of an older person, where you get bone on bone, if you will. It's starting to deteriorate at that level. And the same here, this is the distal femur. And this ridge right here should be white and solid like this one is, but it's being worn down here. And if you actually look at the toes on the sow, the hoofs, you can tell by the way one hoof will be longer than the other, and it's pushing the weight in, and you can see that reflected in the wear and tear on these joints. And these are only like a year and a half old sows. So we've got a lot of problem. Exercise wasn't the answer. Yes?
Quick question. So obviously this is a premature degradation of the joint.
Yep.
What is the speculation of the etiology?
My first thought was lack of exercise. Obviously it's not that. My latest thought is a similar situation to broilers. They have the same problem. Growth rate. That these animals are growing so fast that they're not remodeling bone and cartilage correctly. And so I've done research looking at feeding ginger root extract, which is stimulates blood flow to the cartilage, as well as glucosamine chondroitin, and they're still the same. It hasn't helped. I'm thinking, and it's just a thought, it's not very scientific, that the animals are selected to grow so fast that this is being impaired. And the way I have evidence for that is these girls, number one, as well as broilers, for the same exact situation. And if you look at like large breed dogs, and they have a special food for those dogs to slow them down on their growth so they don't develop joint problems, it's the same situation. Wait, no?
Same with horses.
Yep, same with horses. So, I don't know, I'm working on it. I'm actually doing a study now to see if I can slow the growth of sows down to increase this. And of course you say, well, that's not going to be financially beneficial because they need to breed faster. But if you can keep them in a herd a year longer, it could prove financially beneficial.
Are you doing that with goats?
Yes. So I started at 3 months of age, slowed the growth down based on diet. And I've got 6 that I killed, but they all had lesions already. And then I got another 6 to kill here in another month. Yeah. So I'm not sure it's going to work. Tail docking, pigs, cows. It was started in cows, actually in New Zealand, to combat leptospirosis because the cows had leptospirosis and their tails had manure on it and was hitting the workers in the face. And to solve that as a human health issue, they started tail docking. Well, that picked up in the United States, where tail docking has become prevalent in the United States. So the question is it painful, number one, and are there better ways to do it? And so we actually did a couple studies with this. We tail docked young calves and older cows and looked at that, as well as we looked at whether there's neuromas in those tails or not. And so this is a test basically for neuroma sensitivity. So this is a cow that was tail docked, and this is either a heat or cold pad on that tail. And this is just a control with a heat or cold pad at the same area. And looked at behaviors, whether it's switching, shifting their feet as they feel pain, and tail curvature. And what we found from both of those studies is tail docking causes pain. But interestingly, there's less pain responses in adult cows versus calves. And that goes against what the typical doctrine is, which is if you're going to do something painful, do it to a young animal. And if you look at literature in rodents, it's actually showing that the younger the animal, the more pain it feels. And it's because I was talking about the myelination of the nerves. Myelination of the nerves occurs later on after birth. It's more fully developed, if you will. So when you do something painful and it's unmyelinated, it spreads out and it causes a bigger pain response. And when we tail docked adult cows with a rubber ring, there's much less behavior response than a young calf, and that would be the possible suggestion for that response. Obviously, they don't have tails; they have more fly issues. The tails did show signs of neuromas, sensitivity to heat and cold. And the bottom line is it doesn't decrease somatic cell count, which is the reason we're using to do it. So there's no reason to do it. So in conclusion, life without pain doesn't exist. It's not going to. We do recognize that animals feel pain. And our responsibility then is just to alleviate and minimize pain wherever we can. There's a lot of research I showed you. We're trying to look at alternatives. And then we're going to support future efforts to develop management tools to alleviate and minimize pain.